This is Life Strategies with Monique.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Life Strategies with Monique. I'm your host, Monique Petaway, and I have with me a special guest by the name of Lakeisha Muhammad. Lakeisha is a wife, mother, life coach, speaker, and she is also an author who also has a book that has been released this year, 2019, and we're definitely going to talk about that in just a moment. But she is a fierce fighter of adverse mindsets and environments as a leader. She's very passionate about empowering women and others, and she's here today to talk about a very, very intimate topic that a lot of people really don't talk about, and I'm so glad that she has decided to be on the show today. Lakeisha, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me on, Monique, to be able to share parts of my story and my journey with your listeners, and hopes that someone will be, empowered, inspired, and motivated. Those are my foundational principles that I kind of apply and follow by in everything that I do.
Awesome. Well, awesome. I'm so glad that you decided to share your story today, because your story is a topic that I can associate with, because I can say that is actually a commonality between us. So I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm going to let you go ahead and share your story on how you ended up actually writing your book, becoming a coach, becoming a speaker, and an author, because we all have a story. And I want my listeners to know a little bit more about you and who you are.
Okay. Awesome. Well, listeners, my name is Lakeisha Muhammad, as you all have already heard. And with all these different intricate parts of my life, of my journey, and my purpose and my passion, I'm just like anyone else who has, a special calling, if I can say that, on their life. If you come into a place where you know God gave you this purpose, there's something in you that is bigger than you. You may not know it right away. I was born and raised in the urban city, inner city community in Boston, Massachusetts. A lot of rough neighborhoods. It's you come from the dysfunctional household. You have your different levels of addictions and abuse, and then as you become older, being in that environment, you start to pick up a lot of bad habits, and you start to act that out. So for me, not really having that close-knit relationship with my mom as a young girl, it was like an emotional disconnect between me and my mom when I was younger. So I would always go to everyone else outside of my mom. And not that everyone else was giving me the right information, but it was just needing those outlets, someone to talk to, and trying to figure out your womanhood and figure this out and figure that out. I'm one of those women who, for me, it was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of learning things by making mistakes and learning consequences from that. That's kind of how my life, had evolved through a lot of different times, from, childhood to young teen to adult, and then this full adult. And the reason why I say full adult is because at certain levels of adulthood, you're still immature. You're still doing things that, mature adults would not do. You're just still looking at it like, I'm just having fun, I'm just living life. But then at some point, God will reel you in. You know what I mean?
Yes, He will.
God will definitely reel you in, and He will start getting in your ears. You'll start hearing, it's like you think you're hearing things like you're going crazy. And you ever, I don't know if you or any of your listeners ever had that experience where you're sitting in these spaces and you're like, what is that? You know, it's like, huh?
Yeah.
It's like things you never would have thought of on your own. Stuff just starts popping in your mind. And for me, you know, I'm a dreamer. So that's another part of me that I had to start learning about, was the things that would go on, you know, in my sleep. And as I got into ministry, I'm kind of trying to bring everyone forward. It's probably going to go a little back and forth, but please stay with me. I would say the biggest part of my life was when I started going to church, when I made the decision to get saved, to get me and my children baptized in my 20s. That's where life really started going through a turn of events. That a lot of it I didn't understand. A lot of it was by my choices. But at the same time, I felt like God was calling me there. And there were things he needed me to know, things I needed to learn spiritually. So I got in, you know, to church, was going to church, had my children in church. And, you know, because you grow up learning, you know, the household, everyone has to, you know, pray together, stay together, go to church together. All of those components, you know, a lot of us grew up with. So you're doing that, you're implementing that. So I was doing that with my children when they were younger. And through my transitions, you know, I started to move around to different church environments. But I stayed in church though, because it was something that I just felt deep inside of me I needed at the time. But what I learned later on after being in church for so long was no one never really took the time to tell me what it was like after you get saved. I never got that part. So once I got saved, it was like all hell was breaking loose. Pardon my French, but it was like all hell just kept breaking loose. And I was like, what happened? Right. I was like, my life was I felt like my life was somewhat fine before that. But then when I made that decision, it was like nonstop transition, nonstop change, nonstop attacks. It just kept going and going and going. But then it's like, okay, that was the first phase. And then the next phase was, you know, I had moved around, I moved away. And when I moved, it was like I got back into church. I started joining a church where I had lived. And at that point, it was like God started using me in a different way. Now I'm not just in joining the church, attending the church. Now I'm on leadership. Now I'm, you know, God's assigning things to me. And I'm like, okay, this is nervous, but okay, you know, because, you know, when you're in church, you know, they want you to be active. They don't just want you to be sitting in the pews. You come to church, you know, and you get involved. So that's what I did, you know. So I started doing announcements, and it went from announcements to armor bearer. Then I went from armor bearer to taking gifting classes to learn what my gifts were. And then I went from that to figuring out what my gifts were at the time. And then I started going to ministry school. At that time, I was going for evangelist. And it was definitely different. It was something that I don't think if you've ever experienced it, you can't quite give it that full extent of explanation.
Right.
So here I am. Now I'm really in church. Now I'm in church for real, for real. That's how I say it. Now I'm in church for real. Now I'm, you know, I'm in church and speaking and, you know, doing all these different activities. And it's like, okay, got a little lighter. You know, I'm meeting new people, doing things I've never done. but I'm on this journey. Now I'm on this bigger spiritual journey, and I'm just trying to figure, get it. But it was like God wasn't giving it to me. It was like, okay, God, I don't get this. This is not something I would have came up with on my own. Mm-hmm. But I can say that it was good for me. It was good for me. It was definitely what I needed because the way life was going. And later on, as I continued to travel in ministry, that's where God started to give me the revelation. That's where he started to show me, this is the why. This is why I had you here. This is why I have you here. And I was like, okay, God. And then I go to another level of ministry. And I'm in another church because things didn't work out with that church. Then when I got to the other church, it was different because at that time, my pastor then, she was more of a teacher. So she was teaching, these different components so you can have that full understanding. I stayed with that ministry for about 7 years up until 2018. And in that particular ministry, I ended up becoming a minister. And then I went from minister to eldership. And I stayed at eldership for 7 years. And then it got to another part of my life that I definitely didn't understand till like 2 years ago. And it happened, I think, right when I turned 40. I don't know what it was about 40. But when I turned 40, it was a different walk with God. It was like, okay, God, something don't feel right. It was like I was feeling like a shift was coming. And I didn't know what that was. And I was wrestling with it, and I kept going to my pastor, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on with me. I'm feeling like something is off. I'm feeling like something is changing. I feel like there's a shift, and I don't know what it is. So I remember one day my pastor came to me, and she shared with me a dream she had. And in this dream, she said she seen me parting ways from the ministry. Now, I didn't know what that meant, because I knew that, she wanted me to stay. I knew that I wasn't going anywhere at the time. So when I started going through this bigger transition, I always remember that dream she shared with me. And then I found myself in a place where God was like pulling me, doing things more outside of ministry versus in ministry. And I didn't understand. I'm like, okay, God, well, I'm trying to do this over here, but it's like I keep going over here, And so at that point, it was like I had to find myself in a lot of quiet places. Like I had to really shut down from people because I really needed to sit with myself to figure out what was going on with me. Even though I'm asking my pastor questions and she's telling me things and I'm like, okay, you're telling me this, but I'm still feeling like this, So after a while, it's kind of like you just go into a quiet space, and she was definitely praying for me and lifting me up and all of those different things. And I was reading my word and just a lot of praying and fasting because I'm like, God, I don't know what's going on here. I'm feeling like I'm being pulled away from something and I don't understand. So up in about summertime, the end of last summer, that's when I separated from the ministry that I was a part of. And it wasn't easy. And I know this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. It's like, what do you do when you feel like you're being called out of ministry? You done walked this walk. You done went to all these different levels of leadership. You've been in the church. You've been active. You was even, God even had me preaching. So it's like you were doing all of this, but now God is calling you out of that. It's like, what do you do? And in that moment, I was like, God, I don't know what to do, but God was like, I got you. And then I realized that my spiritual walk wasn't even about all of the things that I was doing. A lot of the things that I was doing is because I thought I had to do those things and I chose to do them. So I did them. But for me, God was saying, I needed to get you spiritually positioned because of where you're at now. Mm-hmm. I needed to have you positioned. I needed you spiritually grounded. I needed the word in you. And this is how I had to get it in you. This is how I had to, gird you up. This is how I had to have you in these places and spaces by taking you on this journey of ministry. You had to do that. But it also, you were serving a purpose there. But that's not where I was going to keep you. And when that came to my spirit, I was like, wow, God, like I really broke down, and I'm just being very honest and transparent about what happened to me. I'm sure there may be someone else out there who may have had a similar experience. And they may have left, church, or mm-hmm. God called them to a different journey. But what I realize is that not everyone understands that. So for me, where I finally had a breath of fresh air was because I started meeting a lot of pastors who had retired from ministry. Some of them left, for different reasons. Some of them, ended up doing other things. But the part for me was knowing what I've learned is that your purpose can be interchangeable. What God may have called you to then, that may not be for now. I learned that God can call you to different things when he wants to. And not everybody stays, in that ministry place forever. Some people do, some people don't. Because I think for me, what I started to realize was that, God is not limited to just you serving ministry and your purpose within the church building. Mm-hmm. And within that, it's bigger than that. Ministry is in me. So I'm going to still be doing ministry no matter what I'm doing. When I'm doing women's empowerment, I'm still ministering, coaching, I'm still ministering. Whatever my purpose is, writing, I'm still ministering because I'm feeding people, Mm-hmm. I'm feeding them what they need, what I'm supposed to feed them. I'm helping them. I'm giving them tools. I'm giving them information on different levels. But it's still our ministry. It's still serving a purpose because that's what's in me. That's what God put in me. And, people battle that out with you. It becomes debatable of what's ministry, what's not ministry, Mm-hmm. It becomes the battle of, okay, well, just by my last name alone, we didn't get to that part yet, but even with my last name, that stirs a pot, and people look, as soon as people look or hear my last name, they assume who I am and what I am. And then I have to correct people. And that's where I always tell people, never assume or judge a book by its cover. Don't assume what you think somebody is because of their last name. I get it. Muhammad, they relate that. That's a Muslim last name. People relate that. But I always tell people, I'm not Muslim. Mm-hmm. I don't practice that culture. I always had to tell people that. I used to tell people, no, I'm a Christian woman. I'm not a Muslim woman. So they'd be like, well,
yeah.
Well, did you used to be Muslim and then you was? Yeah. I was like, there was none of that. I was always this. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's where I bring it back and I tell people, if you want to know my last name came from my husband's last name. I took on his last name. But but I tell people I still have part of my last name as well. So mm-hmm. my last name really is Cook Muhammad, but I don't really, it's so long to write on stuff. So I abbreviate it, and I just put the C in the middle. Mm-hmm. But I've learned that, you can't just assume who somebody is by their name. Right. It's better to ask them questions. So for me, even with that whole, Muslim versus Christian thing in my last name, that's been a part of my spiritual journey as well, because I went through the battle of, well, your husband's Muslim, you're Christian, and that don't mix, and, you can't be with him, and, this is not yoke right in God. And it was a constant battle. And I was just like, okay, God, it's either I'm going to get people out my head and come and sit over here quietly, or I'm going to keep listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
So because, and like I said, for me, it was like I had to start studying, more extendedly. I had to start researching that word about being yoked, being unequally yoked, because I needed a deeper understanding of what that word meant, because they wasn't giving that to me in the church. I wasn't learning that in church. I wasn't learning that. So I had to study that, because I'm like, I need to understand. So for me, I was like, okay, God, well, you knew this man before he showed up to me. You knew where he was. You knew where I was. So why is it people have such a big problem with what you do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that being yoked, it's not just about your spirituality and your faith. It's also other parts to that. It's about, your goals, your path, your journey. What do you guys, what journey and path are you two on? Together, like what are your mindsets like on money and family,
Mm-hmm.
all these different components. So when I started to learn that, that's when I started to share that with other people, because people were getting very discouraged in their relationships,
Mm-hmm.
because they were in these blended faith relationships and marriages. But like me, myself, they were being taught something that was, totally different from what they had, studied.
Right. And so
And it was, mm-hmm.
yeah, well, even in your relationship, and yours is a unique relationship as well, which hopefully you'll get to that about you and your husband.
Oh, yes.
And I know
Sorry,
people
listeners,
don't
yes.
quite understand, how it is you have such or just having a marriage period based on your circumstances. And I totally get that, because I've been, where you currently are. So could you share a little bit about you and your husband?
Yes. So for me and my husband is incarcerated. Presently, he's been incarcerated almost 30 years now for murder, and he is now fighting his case to get some relief from that, some way, somehow. And is that an easy thing, to talk about? It used to be hard to talk about. Mm-hmm. But now that I know that my relationship has a purpose in it, now that God has given me a voice behind it. So now I just encourage, anyone out there who has a loved one in prison, if you're in a marriage, or if you're not in a marriage, but you're with someone, or you've been with them a very long time and they ended up in this unfortunate circumstance, and you made the decision to stick by them and be there for them, and fight it out. My purpose is to encourage them to say, don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid of judgment. Judgment comes with the territory. I've been judged many, many a times. I've been asked a lot of questions of, why would you want to be with someone in prison? Why would you stay with him? And, oh, he's a murderer. I've had so many attacks come from family to outsiders. Mm-hmm. And I just had to get to a place of saying, you know what, God, this ain't even about them. And I had to always encourage myself with my faith that God, there's a divine purpose to me staying in this relationship. There's a divine purpose with me not walking away. I promise you guys, there were many times I wanted to walk away from my relationship, but God wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
And I tell people that all the time. It wasn't about what I didn't want to do, it's what God wouldn't let me do. Because every time it got to that point and I would, pray specific prayers and God would show me.
Mm-hmm.
And when God gave me the confirmation, that's when I said, okay, God, you give me the strength. They say God won't give you nothing you can't handle.
Right.
So I've been with my husband for almost 20 years, and we've been married for 4 years out of the 20. And it's a journey. I'm not going to tell you there aren't low days, good days, tired days, frustrating days. But what brings me back around is my faith in God.
Mm-hmm.
That's what brings me back around.
Yeah. I mean, because, in our conversation, when we talked before, and that was our commonality, you're currently married to, someone that's incarcerated. And I was previously married to someone incarcerated. And your relationship, you say it's been, over 20 years. And I totally understand. Yeah. I stayed in mine for 10 years. And I totally understand what you say when you actually have to hear from God to tell you, when it's okay to stay and when it's okay to go, because I had to hear from God. And God, I know he speaks to us all, but we have to hear it ourselves to hear direction on what God wants us to do and how he wants us to move. So, and having to deal with people on the outside, and that judgment, I understand that, because people, they don't understand. They don't understand what it's like to have a loved one behind bars and how you're supporting them and what your relationship is like. So it is quite difficult. It is so difficult to be married with a loved one in prison and having so many people on the outside with so much to say. You really, really have to stay prayed up in that kind of a circumstance. So I know with you, with 20 years, and being married for 4, God has definitely been with you. And what I love about you, Lakeisha, and this is what I absolutely love, is to see how you're still in ministry. Because, that's the one thing that God has placed you in to have a platform to be able to share your story and encourage women and empower women. Because if one thing that I know for sure is that this is not a topic that people like to talk about.
No, it is. It definitely is not. God ended up, like 2 years ago in 2017, he ended up putting me on a platform where the conversations were more and more and more. I ended up being in positions of, going and sitting and talking with legislators, my, local legislators in my state, the state of Massachusetts, where I was going, to state house meetings and sitting and talking about, my husband's story and, talking about prison reform and, mass incarceration at the time. That's what they called it. So I found myself in this, not the political bubble of it, but I found myself coming into a place of this advocate. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, God, what are we doing here? Like, okay, God, like this, I was okay over here just, doing my women's empowerment, encouraging, empowering, ministering to the women there and doing all of these different things. But then God's like, no, I realized that my husband's story, this journey has become a part of my purpose.
Right.
So God these are the spaces that God was going to put me in. And then when I try to shut the door on it, the door just never shut. And now God has opened that door back up again. And I'm like, okay, God. But I feel like God was saying, I never told you to shut the door in the first place,
There it is again.
I never told you to stop doing what I gave you to do. And I feel like God was just slapping me in my head with that. Like, I told you, this is all a part of your purpose.
Right.
And this is all a part of you ministering. This is ministry for you, Lakeisha. And this is how you're going to do it. And if you keep trying to deviate from it, you know how they tell you, if you keep trying to run away from God, God's going to find a way to come and get you, you
I know,
know?
you bring it back, yeah.
Right. So this is what happened. I try to shut the door on, you know, going into these spaces and talking to people and doing all these things. But then the door never shut. The door opened right back up. So now here I am, you know, not only doing women's empowerment, I'm still advocating, you know, on behalf of prison reform and my husband. I'm still going and sitting and speaking with legislators, you know, and, you know, then he had me just do a prison documentary with a woman out in Philadelphia, which I will share briefly if we have enough time to share that project. And I'm still, you know, supporting my husband. So it's all in God's purpose. And that's where I had to leave it. You know, once you kind of tune out the negative voices, and I call that, you know, the enemy of voices, and you really sit with God. God knows all things, you know, and then it would be just specific things that God would, you know, I feel like God would speak to him and he would say it to me, and it would just be a confirmation. You know, I feel like when there's a confirmed word to something you feel in your spirit, that's how you know you're on the right path, or when that opposition comes in. And that's what I always tell people. Opposition is just a sign that something greater, you know, is coming. Something's about to break, you know, for you, if you just hold on. Right. And I'm not saying it's easy holding on, but if you just hold on, it will get better. You know, it will, that relief will come in eventually. Yeah. You know, when people say to me, you know, oh my God, Lakeisha, I don't, you're so strong. I don't know how you would do it. Yeah. You know, you've been, you know, you're staying in there, you know. They're like, how can you walk around with a smile on your face and just be this happy, bubbly person when you have this whole husband in prison? Yeah. You're in this situation. I said, it's nothing but God and His purpose. But God gave me that peace when He, you know, put us together. You know, God's like, you're not going to feel as burdened as some other people will. If anything, I'll use your strength to be a strength for someone else. Wow. You know, it's like, I'll use you to encourage someone else that's in this situation. I'm going to use your story for you to talk about it. You know what I mean? To encourage other people, to encourage other couples, and not even just couples who are, you know, in this situation, but couples in general. Because regardless to, you know, him being in prison and me being out here, you know, our purpose is still being served, because we still make sure we apply the principles that you're supposed to apply to a marriage. And then we had to learn, you know, what does our marriage feel like for us? You know, because I've heard this a lot. You know, you have people that try to tell you how to be in your marriage. And what I had to learn from me is, you know, we have to define what our marriage feels like for us. You know, how are we going to keep this marriage together? How are we going to keep that, you know, energy flowing, you know, for us to be able to fight through this journey, you know, to come out winning on the other side. Right. So we kind of had to, you know, put ourselves in a place of, you know, making sure that, you know, we're praying, you know, we go on these fasts. We have open communication with each other, you know. We read books together. So, you know, and these are a lot of questions that women ask. You know, women are curious about, like, how do you do that? Like, how does that work? I'm like, without a lot of the other physical components of the marriage, we make sure the mental and emotional and spiritual components are intact. Right. We work on that.
Yeah, and I have to agree with that, because that is definitely something you definitely have to do, especially when you have a loved one, you know, that's incarcerated. There definitely has to be that communication. There definitely has to be faith involved, because it is not easy. It is not an easy journey. And you've mentioned journey, you know, throughout this entire conversation, we talked about the journey, and I relate to the journey because in your journey, God revealed to you purpose. He revealed to you passion and destiny for your life, and for you, He did the exact same thing for me. So I just want to encourage my listeners out there who are listening to know and understand that whatever they're going through, for them to really try to understand the reason behind what they're going through, because they definitely can find, purpose behind, their struggles. And a lot of people don't want to see the strength behind it or what can be gained from what they're going through. They would rather just, kind of like, like wallow in it and say, oh God, why am I going through this? Where in essence, God is really training you up for where He's trying to take you.
Yes. That is so true, Monique. And how I learned about purpose was when I was in ministry training, when I went to ministry school for the first time, and I was in my teacher's class, who at that time, she was an evangelist, and she told us a story about something that happened to her. And when she said, what she said, that she ended up running into, the person who, had victimized her. And she thought she was going to cringe and, all of that when she seen the person. But she said she was so light, like she just felt this, like God was just with her. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, as she finished off the story, she said, I need you guys to understand that there is purpose to your pain. That has stayed with me my whole entire life since then. And I always used to bring that up about what she said to me. I used to bring it back to my mind of, I remember hearing, someone say to me, there's purpose to your pain. And I never understood that at first. But then, like you said, God starts to reveal things to you after a while. When you stay on a journey, the revelation comes, and He will start to show you everything that you went through in your life with purpose for where you are now.
That's right.
And I also, learned from one of my coaches is that it's not what happens to us, it's what happens for us. Mm-hmm. Because had I not went through, my own domestic situation, had I not went through, the loss of, my children and their dad, if I had not went through these different things, I would not be where I'm at today. I would not have found my purpose, my passion. I would have not tapped into anything that I do today. I don't believe I would have. Right. And, so for me, it was like God said, there's purpose to your pain, Lakeisha. That's and right. Now I get it. Now I get it. And now I know that
later we get it.
Right. And it's not what happens to me, it's what happens for me. And then it also has to do with how am I responding to what is happening? And like you said, everyone doesn't get that. They don't understand that. And it's not, some people would say it's not easy. And I never would tell anybody it's easy. But what I do know is that if you're going to talk about faith and you're going to talk about God and you believe God, you got to walk that. Yeah. You got to walk that walk. You can't just, you got to, you have to really show that this is what I believe and this is what I stand on and this is what empowers me. Awesome. So I'm definitely encouraged more and more to talk about, now I'm okay with telling my story about me and my husband. Before I wasn't comfortable. Yeah. I never talked about my husband. I never talked about him being in prison. Mm-hmm. And when I started talking about it, people were like, wow. Yeah. But for me, it was a relief. It was like, God, okay, I'm okay. And when people would come to me and say the positive they took from my story, that's how I knew, okay, Keisha, yeah.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that I learned, when I was going through that during that season in my life, is that it was such a shame factor attached to, where my husband was at the time. But as time progressed and I was able to start sharing my story, of course, the shame factor went away. So it was kind of like the enemy wanted to keep you or keep me in a place of shame versus being able to, release and let go of all of that burden, all of that shame, all of that hurt that, you were feeling inside. Because in
Yeah.
actuality, well, for me, I began to feel like it was something I had done wrong, something that
Mhm.
I needed to be ashamed about. It was kind of like that guilt by association kind of a deal. And when in actuality,
Yeah.
I had nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, absolutely none,
Yeah.
no reason at all. But that's how the enemy plays on your mind to try to trick you to not being into who God has designed you to be. So it took time for me to realize that
That's
I
so
didn't have
true.
anything to be ashamed about. And so the stigma today is people have loved ones in prison, and it is a topic that
Yes.
people just don't talk about. So I'm just grateful, and I'm just so, just you just bless my soul to know that what you're doing in ministry now and how you're getting out and sharing your story, because I totally understand the stigma that was associated with that more people need to hear our stories and hear what we've experienced and how we've been able to cope, because there's so many people who are incarcerated today. And I'm reminded, and when I go places, I share this with my listeners as well. When I speak in places, is that for every one person that's incarcerated, there are 2 or 3 people on the outside. So that means if there's 1 million in prison, there are 3 million on the outside that are suffering. And that's the part
That's true.
that people miss, that they
Yes.
have family members on the outside that are left behind suffering, that are left behind just trying to make it. And so what you're
That is
doing
true.
as an advocate is so powerful, because you um, talk about solo, because I know solo is something that you're also
Oh
doing.
yes.
So yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
talk about
So
solo, because that's the activist part of what you're doing in your ministry.
yes. Solo stands for Supporting Our Loved Ones Solo Project. This was a project that actually my husband came up with and asked me to come on board and support. And he started this project back in 2017. And, as there were different things he wanted to do with it, but, God kind of took it in a different direction. And what we were doing with Solo, we would go out, sit with families. Well, I was going out sitting with families, offering them resources that I had, or, helping them with information. More importantly, information that they were not aware of, things they did not know. They didn't even know where to go look for it at.
Mm-hmm.
Like I tell people, I don't limit what's going on in prison just to the state that I'm in. So for me, when I was, you know, I would research, I do a lot of research on the advocate part of it. I look at what's going on in other states, what's going on across this country when it comes to prison reform, when it comes to, incarceration and families. I look all the way across the board, because it's not just happening where I'm at, it's happening everywhere. And in some places it's worse than others. So that was one of the bigger parts of Solo, was sharing, resourceful information, keeping, families and share even other advocates and activists that didn't even know what was going on, sharing with them what's going on so they can look into it, just making sure everyone stays educated about how the prison system is set up and how systematic it is and how it's not meant for Black and brown people at all. And it's definitely taking the lives of our younger generation, because they're going into prison very young.
Yeah,
And then half of them are coming out, yes, very, very old. And there's so many things that get overlooked. But now we're in a place where it changes happening little by little, put it that way. We do have some laws that have been, put in place. A lot of laws have been overturned and changed around, and it's working in the favor for, many people, that are in prison, but it should be able to work for more people in prison. The goal is, how can we curb incarceration? How can we, I don't think it's going to totally go away, to be honest. I know that's some people's goal. They want to do away with, prison reform and mass incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there's a way to curb it if we just keep, working, trying to work together and really educate ourselves on what's going on. And that's one thing I do. I educate myself on everything that's going on concerning the prison. And then, like I said, my husband, you know, he shares things with me. We bring it back to the communities of families. I post a lot of different information online. Right now, we have a Facebook group where people can go on there and you can see a lot of the information I post. I share events that are going on throughout, you know, communities, or even if it's in another state, I share that information as well. And then it's just kind of network. People invite me out to speak, you know. That's kind of like a platform as well where I share, you know, my husband's story, and people ask me a lot of questions. And, you know, I just answer them. You know, I just believe in being transparent. I mean, I don't believe in getting out here being a voice if I can't be honest and transparent about my own life, you know, right. And what I deal with, and knowing and saying, yes, I have a loved one in prison too, because that's another thing. People may not really want to talk or share their story if they can't relate. They feel like you can't relate to me, so why am I talking to you? And I felt like that too. So that's why I didn't talk to a lot of people about my husband, because I was like, they can't relate to me. What am I talk to them for? You know, and even my own pastor, there was a times when I didn't want to talk either, because I felt like, pastor, you know, you're guiding me, your spirit, you know, you're here spiritually, but you ain't with no husband. He ain't in prison. You know, your husband ain't locked up. You know, that's kind of how me and my pastor would talk to one another. And, you know, and then finally, like I said, you know, God sends you what you need. And he started to really put me around people who could relate, who I could, you know, talk to every now and then about certain things. And just to be able to kind of, like I said, share and inform people. So if anybody goes on Facebook, you will, you type in Solo Project, Solo with all capital letters. And you will see a lot of different posts. We're actually going to bring that group into doing more articles type things, sharing things from inside of the prison and posting it onto the group. So it's just very informative, very informative.
Awesome. So Lakeisha, you are doing so many things that are basically empowering women. You're supporting definitely your husband in prison. You're speaking out on your circumstances and things that are going on, but you're also you've written a book. So you are really busy.
Yes. My book writing. I've always been a writer. And, you know, I love to journal, all of those different things. It wasn't until, I would write things. You know how you start writing, but then you don't finish it?
Yeah.
Or you say, or you feel like this is going to turn into a book, but then you never do nothing with it.
Oh, yeah.
So honestly, for me, I really didn't get that push until God kind of brought it back around in 2017. God really, really pushed me and said, I need you to write, and I need you to not stop writing this time. And when I started writing, God, everything just started coming together. Like I was studying, researching, applying my information, you know, applying my wisdom, just everything in my brain and in my spirit. I was just writing and writing and writing. And that was with my first book, which was called The Jewelry Box. And that book basically was talking about, you know, love and faith and happiness and a lot of self-love. And, you know, I put a lot of good nuggets in there. I pulled that book at the end of last year, but I am going to put the jewelry box back out again, but I'm going to add, you know, new content and, you know, change the cover and things like that. But now I have my second book out that I published January of this year. And this book, you know, I apologize, listeners, but I have to be honest with the book it is. Please pardon me, Monique. I don't mean to, you know, I mean, everyone's different when it comes to the littlest cuss word, but this book is coming from a very deep, eternal place. And so far I've gotten good reviews on it. And the book that I ended up writing this year, put out this year, This book is actually called I Am Dominating All of My Eternal, I'll spell it SHIT. How to break free from mental and emotional captivity. And this book right here is a tool book. It's a guide. It's a self-help guide book. It's basically me just putting a lot of tools and information on how we start to deal with the mind, how we start to deal with our emotions, how we start to deal with what goes on in our, our mental, emotional, and spiritual, because that gets overlooked a lot. It's very surface with a lot of us. We don't want to touch that deep issue that's going on. And I'm a firm believer that everything inside comes out. Mm-hmm. So whatever you don't deal with inside of you, it's going to show up. It's going to show up in everything you do. It's going to show up in your ministry, your relationships, your marriage. It's going to show up. And we have to really, with everything going on, as we see, people are dealing with a lot of mental health issues. People are going through a lot of mind battles, emotional battles. We have to really, really look at that and say, what is going on within me? And a lot of it is generational. And if I can just share that. So I talk a lot about, I touch on different sets of information. I share, some things that empowered me with some other books that I have read that deal with, the mind and emotion and spirit. So I'm basically just share with people, from my level of information and training and wisdom on how you can really start to break down the things that are going on eternally inside of you. And it's really time, I just say it's really time, meaning within a process of just start somewhere. It's like, I've just seen too much stuff going on with people, and even with myself. I believe in always checking in on you, and I'm one of those people where I always got to make sure that my mind and my spirit, my emotions in order, because I used to be one of them people. I was very bad at that. I mean, I get in my feelings quick, like what you just said. Yeah. And then God be like, okay, Lakeisha, all right now. Then I'd be like, God, I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay, I'm getting it together. Like, just, you being that mirror, you know what I mean? It's like what you see in you, sometimes you see in other people. Mm-hmm. And for me, when I would see that, I'd be like, oh God, no. I can't, I got to deal with that, Uh-huh. So it's all about practicing what you preach and what you teach. So if you're going to teach somebody on mental and emotional and spiritual things, you got to make sure you're eating that food too. It may not be the same food, but make sure you're eating the food that you need to eat for you to have a healthy, eternal, shift going on. So that book, it is on Amazon.com. It's under Lady Lakeisha Muhammad. If anybody wants to go and check that out on Amazon, or you can, I think I sent you a link. I don't know if you have a link, Monique, but I can give you a link too. So if anybody inquires about that book, if you want to share with them, if you want to share with them personally, you can. Or I'm on Facebook. As we close out, I mean, I can share ways to get in contact with me on social media as well.
Okay, well, awesome. So, yes. Well, thank you so much, Lakeisha, for sharing your story with us today. And definitely, I'll have all your information. And to my listeners out there, I will make sure that I put all of her information in the show notes. So if you want to reach out to Lakeisha, if you want her to come and share her story with you and your people, your congregation, with whomever, definitely please reach out to her. She's doing amazing things around the city and around this world, sharing her story. So again, Lakeisha, thank you for being on the show today. And again, to my listeners, until next time, stay educated and empowered. Yeah.
You've been listening to Life Strategies with Monique. Contact Monique Pettaway at www.moniquepettaway.com or info@moniquepettaway.com.